So hello, welcome back to the next episode of the Chronicles of Koenigsegg, and today, for me, is where this brand takes the most substantial leap almost in the entire history of the brand. We've gone from superchargers to turbochargers, and interestingly, while this might sound a little bit insignificant, this is where cars go from having initials to names. Previous cars have been CCX and CCR, and today we are in front of the Agera. Now, what's remarkable about this car is they actually only made 7 cars. It was produced from 2010 to 2014, so just 7 cars across 4 years. And to put a spot of context on that, one of the rarest cars that Koenigsegg ever made was the 1-1, which they specifically made 6 cars plus 1 prototype, and they actively went out to put that number on that car. This car was made in small numbers just because of the early days of the company being very small. So this is one of the rarest cars that we will feature across this series. Now, just quickly back to the name Agera. Not only has it got a name, but the name actually means something. This will become a consistent theme as we follow this journey onwards. Agera in Swedish means to take action. So a minute ago, I was talking about this car taking a sort of a J-curve of evolution, because we've got upgraded gearbox, we've got a new engine components, we've got adaptive aero, we've got new wheels, and we've got new brakes. The engine components we'll speak about shortly, but first of all, let's talk about the wheels. Now, this particular car has actually got upgraded air core wheels, which were actually introduced on a later car, which we'll share with you in the next episode. But the Agera originally came with wheels called VGR alloys. Now, VGR stands for Vortex Generating Rims. This is actual truth. So the original wheels which came with the Agera were designed in such a way that they acted as turbines, and they would literally suck and draw air in to help with cooling of the new brakes, but also assist with downforce. Now, speaking of brakes, this is the first Koenigsegg to introduce carbon ceramic brakes. These are vented, drilled discs, and it's also significant because this is the stage where Koenigsegg started developing their own brakes in-house. This is a massive game changer for the brand. Now then, as we walk our way backwards towards the engine bay, this is really tricky. So this is the adaptive rear wing, and this wing actually flexes dependent on the air load which is flowing over the car. Now, the idea of that is to reduce drag at higher speeds, and believe me, when we take you out on track shortly, this thing achieves some seriously high speeds. Now then, onto the really juicy stuff underneath this engine bay. Okay, so let's talk turbocharging. Previous generation Koenigsegg, CC8S, CCX and CCR were all supercharged cars, but TurboTech in 2010 basically eradicated turbo lag, which encouraged Christian to apply it to this car. However, Koenigsegg, being the innovators they were, decided to move the pre-cat behind the wastegate instead of behind the turbo. Remarkably, this resulted in an increase of power of 300 horsepower just by moving that one component. And this resulted in increased torque, power, response, and matching that of a larger engine with less weight. And this 5-litre V8 twin turbocharged engine weighs just 197 kilograms. Okay, so earlier on we mentioned that the other primary upgrade was the gearbox, and this is developed in conjunction by a company called SEMA. It's a 7-speed automatic gearbox, but it's really tricky, as every single component on this car is. It does actually have 2 clutches, but it doesn't actually actuate in the way that a twin clutch gearbox does. Its primary shifting function is that of a single clutch, but it has a secondary, smaller wet clutch. The benefit of that is it actuates as a single clutch gearbox, but the shift speeds are that of a twin clutch box. The reason being, it allows the gearbox to be much smaller, lighter, and more compact than what the size of a twin clutch box would be. So I'll share with you what that feels like when we go and drive it, but the whole thing is all about weight saving, keeping it compact, light, and always innovative. All right, so what does all of these new components add up to? Well, total power output of 960 horsepower, mildly intimidated to share that with you shortly, 1,100 Newton meters of torque, and 250 RPM higher, that's 7,500 RPM, than CCX and CCR. That's the jump from supercharger to turbochargers. So all in all, some pretty substantial upgrades. So as per CCX and CCR, Agera had a completely flat under tray. However, there is much more exaggerated Venturi tunnels here in the form of this beautiful rear diffuser. One of my favorite features of Koenigsegg is when you remove the roof, open both doors, slide yourself in over this massive carbon sill. It gives you an appreciation for the cell construction. This whole cell is made of carbon fiber. Now, for a spot of context, the weight of the carbon cell and the fuel tanks combined is just 70 kilograms. Wrap your head around that for a minute. What I'm sat in here, which is the primary construction of this car, plus fuel tanks, 70 kilograms. And the combined weight of the car, 1,435 kilograms, with something that has 960 horsepower. Just bonkers stuff. So having spent the last few days in a CCX and a CCR, one of the things you immediately feel when you get in this is the evolution of quality. Now, one of the big additions to this is this infotainment system here. Now, one thing which you might not detect on camera is that there is very little, if any at all, plastic which the driver would actually interact with. Everything is machined, engineered and milled. It's beautiful. But one addition which was introduced on Agera was the ghost lighting system. Now, if I was to press this button here, you can see that previously lighting here was invisible, and as a result of laser perforations in this infrastructure here, the light shines through to buttons which once weren't there. It's a really trick feature. And then another massive upgrade is the digital instrument cluster in front of me here. I know this phrase gets thrown around a lot, but it really does feel like you're sitting in some sort of fighter jet cockpit. The evolution from the CC generation of cars to this car is a million years. It's a phenomenal driving environment. Now, we can't walk around this car without talking about its incredible array of specific upgrades, starting with a bespoke custom paint job. It also has blue and yellow claw, that's the painted stripe across the carbon fiber bonnet that actually extends inside the dashboard of the custom interior. It also has an Agera R rear wing. It also has the remarkable air core wheels, which are also off the Agera R. There is a carbon fiber RS steering wheel and one-to-one side mirrors. There's also a sports exhaust, which we shall share that with you shortly. This thing sounds incredible, and ultimately the interior was completely customized at the customer's request. Anyway, some fantastic stats, amazing evolution, but this channel is all about driving. So without further ado, let's get out, find out what this car is all about. You know, what I'm finding amazing about this series, and we're only a few cars in, is that on the outside, these cars kind of look quite similar. It's not until you drill down into the details that you distinctly discover that they each have their own unique character. This one, just as much as any, but this one has taken a J-curve of a leap in development. I mean, even just taking it like this now, it feels, I mean, even the CCR that we drove earlier in the series felt agile, but this, the throttle response, the turn-in, the use of power, I mean, this is 960 horsepower now. Oh, and the gearbox. So, this is quite an interesting gearbox. It's effectively a twin clutch, because it does have a dual wet clutch, but it's also actuated in a similar fashion to an automatic. So it's not until your throttle is pushed past 70% that you get a much faster shift speed. Let's check this out. This is the first, wow, this is the first time that Koenigsegg went from superchargers to turbochargers. There's a big leap in development for these guys. And despite the fact that this is now a heavily turbocharged car, there is very minimal turbo lag. Wow. Got the grip from these Michelins. Good Lord. Lateral load. The chassis is so flat as well. Yeah, you can tell they've really taken on board customer feedback and their own R&D. silly numbers. So let's just go over the basics one more time. 960 horsepower, 1,100 Newton meters of torque in an overall package that weighs just over 1,430 kilograms. I mean, it's getting ridiculous now. I remember when we began this series early on, and this is going to be my favorite quote from Christian von Koenigsegg himself. I sort of half-jokingly said, you know, Christian, you're now in the realms of playing with the edge of physics, aren't you? And he said to me, if you're not slipping your wheels up to the car's terminal velocity, you're not playing with physics. And now I'm in this car, I'm starting to feel that hybrid of that man's genius and craziness in one early package. That is pure Swedish muscle, man. Listen to it. It's angry. This is now running Michelin PS4S. Now it's really raining. And still, the turn in and the confidence is there. And this is something, because Koenigsegg have partnered with Michelin since day one, they've been able to learn and develop together over the years to develop something. Watch this, flat. That's flat in seconds in the wet, no squirm. That partnership between Michelin and Koenigsegg, the learnings that they've had over the years of working together, they begin to learn how each other work and also being able to get the most out of each other as a result. Because Koenigsegg haven't hopped from tyre partner to tyre partner, they've got that consistent, ever-evolving tyre development program. The results are phenomenal. Wow. Now, while the rubber compound itself is phenomenal, Koenigsegg also developed a Formula One style traction control system. What I mean by that, there's actually 5 different driver modes. So at the flick of a button, you can dial it into wet driving mode, dry driving mode, etc. All of these things combined, when you read the stats of this thing on paper, you know, you get in this thing thinking, I don't know how this is going to turn out. I mean, it's really wet now, the power is disproportionate, the weight is low, and yet here we are. I can still string sentences together in a car of this ridiculous power performance, not feeling scared at all. In fact, I'm full of joy, man. It's just outstanding. So what does all of this translate to? Well, 0 to 60 is fairly impressive, but by newer supercar standards or even hypercar standards, it's in the realms of normal these days. 0 to 62 in 3 seconds, granted incredibly fast, but it's after that where Koenigsegg and this car comes into its own. This is 0 to 124 miles an hour in 8 seconds. Which conveniently brings me on to the vented carbon ceramic brakes. But what's very interesting about these brakes is that it was the first time that Koenigsegg actually created and developed their own ceramic brakes in-house. That's something really special about this brand. These days, Koenigsegg make almost every component in-house, but this was a real step change for the brand. To make your own brakes in-house is such a specialist thing, but the way that it reduces the speed, it will do 0 to 124 and 0 again in 13.5 seconds. So steering, again, so much weight to it. It's actually going around this track. It's actually quite a heavy steering weight. The way that it brakes and turns in dynamically. The chassis is so flat and the brakes are always there for you. I mean, it helps with the car being so light. But when you look down at the speedo, the numbers you're pulling, deceptive, really deceptive numbers. You know, when we have this car on our turntable, it looks massive, and you wouldn't think something of this platform should or would handle like this. Just puts it down. It's so good. The torque, I think the defining feature's got to be the torque. The pull is retina bending stuff. I don't think I've ever felt a third gear like that. Honestly, I've never felt anything like it. The traction control, did you hear that? That was a pop and bang, a massive whip crack on the upshift from the exhaust system. Mr. Koenigsegg. What was the world thinking when you dropped this on them?